shame was massive for me. It was the reason I was drinking. And the way to get over shame is to show up and let people see your faults and let people in and let them be vulnerable. Let them see the things that you're struggling with, share your struggles with them. And when you start doing that, the shame starts lifting. And only then can you actually start to fall in love with who you really are. We can't love ourselves and be drowning in shame at the same time.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Willpower Podcast. Today, I'm very excited. Her name is Julie Miller. She runs a few things I was noticing that you do, and we can get into that. Hi, Julie. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I am also a podcaster, so it's great to be on this side of things instead of on your side of things. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Julie Miller. And I am a certified recovery coach. I've been sober from alcohol for 3 years and 3 months, somewhere in there. And I've been hosting my own sobriety podcast. It's just audio, so not on YouTube, but I've been doing that for 2.5 years now. So that's kind of
and the name
Through the Glass Recovery podcast. Yeah, so a friend and I started that back in September of 2022, and it's been a great adventure. I think we're about 120 episodes in now, and it's been wild. It's been a great ride. We meet the coolest people doing that. Really...
I actually tuned in to a few of them before I wanted to talk to you, and the one that I just listened to was great. It was about ADHD and alcoholism, and you know what's interesting? So I have severe ADHD, and that's something actually I'd never have said on the channel before, but I do. I think I had it my whole life, but I got diagnosed. I went to get all the tests done and things like that about 9 years ago, and I struggled mightily with it as far as the ADHD and the alcoholism and other interrelated. I immediately, when I saw that, and I think that was one of your newer episodes, but that was what drew me in right away was, oh my gosh, I have that. Is there a link? So it was cool to jump into your channel and see you guys talk about that in kind of like a round table format. That's really neat. What made you do that? What made you do like a round table style as opposed to something else?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's actually really important to us. So my recovery started on Zoom. And the meetings that I went to, it wasn't AA, it was just a bunch of people getting together, talking about recovery. And we would go into these little breakout rooms for half an hour with like 4 or 5 people and talk about whatever the topic was. And that saved my life. That format, that conversation, listening to people really connect and talk about what they were going through, that's what really connected with me. That's what gave me the connection that I needed with other people to actually be able to tackle this whole sober thing and start the journey to recovery. So what Steve and I decided to do, Steve is my co-host, he's my podcast co-host.
I should have mentioned that, yes.
Yeah, so what we decided to do was create those breakout rooms with 4 or 5 people and throw a topic out at the whole group and just have a conversation about it, because our goal is to allow people to feel like they're sitting there in the conversation, hear stories that connect with them, just whatever resonates. And when you bring 4 or 5 voices to a topic, everybody's going to hear something that hits for them. Because, no matter where you're coming from. I know for me, there was no way in like my earlier days that I was going to show up at a meeting and talk to people about drinking. Like, it wasn't going to happen. I was so ashamed of where I was when I first started this journey. And so my hope is that we'll have those conversations. And if someone out there is a little bit too afraid to actually show up, at least they can hear the stuff that gets talked about. They can hear what a conversation like that sounds like and feels like. So
yeah, that's so important, isn't it? When you're going through this, the sober journey that we're all on here, I find that those group settings, you get to understand so many different perspectives, and you might just catch something that you wouldn't just catch if it was, say, one-on-one counseling or something like that. You know what I mean? It almost sparks that conversation where you might not be thinking about that one particular thing, and all of a sudden, oh my God, like that person does that too. And then you can kind of, you find connection through that vulnerability, which is something that you have on your page as well.
Yeah. So for me, like I mentioned, the shame, right? I thought I was the only person like me going through what I was going through. I was so ashamed of, things like hiding a liquor bottle in my closet and then pretending to be putting away the laundry so I could take a couple of swigs to get me through the next hour. Like I never would have said that out loud when I first started this. And I remember when I finally showed up at a Zoom and I sat down with a group of people and I let those words out. And everybody in that room was like, oh, yeah, me too. Like, I've done that. And as soon as you can say the stuff that's really, really hard to say, the stuff that you think you're the only person who's ever done that, and other people show up and they're like, yeah, I've done that too. I've been there too. The shame just starts to dissipate. And then you can learn how to live with yourself, and you can learn how to move through it and grow. As long as you're drowning in shame, like you're stuck there. So those conversations absolutely were the beginning of freeing me from shame. The vulnerability, the talking about the really hard stuff, and having other people show up and love me through it and empathize with me and share their own stories. That was when the shame started lifting so I could start healing and growing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You just mentioned sharing your own story. Would you mind kind of telling us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I don't have any super big dramatic childhood trauma. I know people generally want to start with childhood. My childhood was like basically on paper, my childhood was perfect. And now 3 years into recovery, I'm like looking back and I can see, oh, well, that's part of the problem. My family looked perfect on the outside, and underneath there was no emotional connection. There was just none of that. So I grew up learning how to be the perfect little girl. And I was a cheerleader and I was a dancer and I was like all the things. I went to a private school and that actually caused a lot of issues that I didn't realize until way later. So teenage years, I kind of rebelled a little bit. I didn't do anything super horrible, but I experimented with drugs a little bit. I drank a few times, nothing crazy. And then I got pregnant and married at 20. So my years of experimenting and running amok really were rather brief. And then as soon as I became a mom, I switched right back to perfect. Like I have to be the perfect mom for this little girl, give her everything that I had. And so I dumped all this pressure on myself to be the perfect mom. And I juggled things. I did okay. I was a young mom. I had my second daughter at 25. So divorced, remarried, second kid. That's a lot.
Yeah.
In 5 years when you're 20 years old.
Age, right?
Yeah. I still really wasn't drinking. I wasn't I would have a drink here, a drink there. Like I'd go out to the bar and drink a little too much once in a while, but it wasn't causing any major problems in my life. The addiction part, the part where I was really just starting to drink too much, didn't happen until I was maybe 29 or 30 years old. So at that time, my kids were, elementary age, and that's when I started.
So 29 was when you kind of started hitting it pretty hard.
Yeah, that's when I would say that there were signs at that point that I was starting to lose control, and I kind of felt that it was more of a problem, and that I should probably. I remember journaling, I need to do something about how much I'm drinking, but it still took me another 10 years to actually figure it out.
So you got married, you had a child. This is all at early 20s. You said 2020. And then for those 9 years after that, you weren't drinking, you weren't abusing alcohol. So what was the turning point? What got to you?
Even in those first 9 or 10 years of parenthood, I was really hurting a lot. I was still really struggling with always feeling like I wasn't good enough. So I homeschooled both of my children. They never did go to school. And we have a farm. So we have 40 acres. We have cows and horses and goats and ducks and turkeys and dogs and everything. So, that's in itself kind of almost a full-time job. My husband worked out of town. He still works out of town. So he's gone 2 weeks at a time. And I'm on my own with the kids. And one of them's moved out now. And the other one's a senior. So, things are a lot different. But at the time, I had 2 little kids. And I was homeschooling, and I was managing our home, and I was managing a farm, and I was doing it without the support of my husband because he was always gone. And that's a lot of pressure. And all I could do was just drown myself in I'm not doing enough. I'm not good enough. And that's all based in shame, right? So I was in a lot of pain. And there were times, even in those 10 years before I really but between when I first became a mom and when I really started drinking heavily, there were times even there where I was suicidal, because I just thought I wasn't good enough and that my family deserved better and that I couldn't be what they needed me to be. The depression was very real. The anxiety, there was so much that I was dealing with and I didn't know how to do anything about it. So I had I wasn't using alcohol to cope. I wasn't really coping. I was just suffering in emotional pain for a good 10 years. Once I started drinking a little bit, it was like, oh, this is the answer. This is how you turn it all off. This is how I feel better. And so it didn't take very long for me to really start drinking too much.
Yeah, you and I are very similar in that, on the sense that we were suffering in silence for a whole decade without saying a peep, right? Not like, not seeking help, not seeking support, trying to do it on our own. And then things got kind of out of control because you're looking for a way out, right? You're looking for some kind of relief. That's what alcohol to me was, for sure. It was just a relief from the pressures of life, the pressures of existing, the pressures of just being a human,
Yeah.
So that's what it was. It's so much, right? It's just so all encompassing when life just throws you so many curveballs and you don't know how to navigate those curveballs. You end up getting stuck with something like abusing alcohol, right?
Yeah. Well, and I didn't have the skills to deal with emotions at all. So anytime hard emotions came up in my life, they just took over. I didn't have any coping skills. I didn't learn them as a teenager. They weren't modeled for me when I was a kid. So I came into adulthood, and if hard things happened, just couldn't deal. And eventually I turned to alcohol to help me deal with that. So that's been a big part of my recovery journey, is gaining the emotional intelligence enough to accept the hard things, deal with the challenges, and do it all without trying to numb or escape from it.
Yeah, and that's so hard, isn't it? I think that's probably one of the hardest parts of becoming sober, is just living with yourself, right? You're still you, but you don't have that, the alcohol to kind of ease the anxiety and stress levels.
Definitely.
But yeah, so what do you do? Well, how do you cope?
How do I cope? There's different parts of it, right? A lot of it is mindset stuff. A lot of it's what's going through my head. And it used to be like, if let's say I was experiencing sadness or grief, there would be this like, I can't stand to feel this way. This is horrible and I have to make it stop. That's like the thoughts that would go through my head, right? And eventually I turned to alcohol. What I've learned is I can just stop it and be like, okay, this is grief. This is really hard. I wish that I wasn't feeling this way, but I'm going to survive this and it's not going to last forever. Like, just changing what I'm saying to myself inside my head has been huge in learning how to cope with emotions. I also have like physical things that I do to distract myself. So, things like
those are
like exercise and I knit and I have a dog that I play with, and all of that stuff is really important too. I spend a lot of time hiking and walking in the woods, and all of that stuff is great too.
That's so important, isn't it? To fill that gap that you spent with drinking, that time that you spend drinking, you need to fill it with something equally as stress relieving, fulfilling, engaging, all those things that we were always seeking for support, or it just a general interest in. We lack when we're addicted to or substance abuse in any form.
Definitely. Yeah. And when you quit drinking, if you've been drinking long enough, you have like no idea what you even enjoy doing, what is actually engaging, what is actually stress relief for you. Like, you have no idea starting out what you're supposed to do with all of that time. And I swear, when you quit, like that first 30 days, it feels like between 4 p.m. and 10 p.m., it's like 33 hours, right? Like, it lasts forever, and you're watching the clock and you're like, oh my God, can I go to bed yet? And that was hard to fill all of that time.
It really is. And when I was heavily addicted, I thought I had these hobbies, and I thought one of them was like, I just love movies. I do love movies. I 100% love them, but not to the extent that I do now, if that makes any sense. Now that I'm like clear-headed and mindful and present all the time, I just want to create and do as many of these little podcasts as I can. And I find myself thinking that I really didn't love movies to the extent that I did. I just think that was the hobby that I chose when I was drinking, because it was the easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just so easy to do, just to put on a movie or whatever, right? Do you have any other tips or any other things that you do that really help you stay sober?
So I'm going to go back really quick. You were talking about like your hobby with the movies, and it was just like the easy thing to do, right? So I had tons of hobbies when I was still drinking, and I'm going to try to make sense of this because I don't know if it's going to make sense, but I struggled so much with self-worth, with just never feeling like I was good enough and always having to prove that I had value, right? All of my hobbies were like look how much I can produce so I can show other people so they can tell me how great I am. Like I gardened so I could take pictures of the vegetables and post them on Facebook. I knitted, and I sewed and I hiked and I did all of these different things just so other people would tell me I was good, that I was enough, that I had value. And so when I quit drinking and then I recognized like all of my hobbies were really hustling for validation, I kind of had to step back and like analyze every single hobby. Be like, do I really even like this? Or am I just doing this? Other people will be like, you're good. You are important, right? And that was a really weird journey that took some time to.
Yeah, it's still taking a lot of time. I mean, I think you're a little longer ahead than I am, but I'm still struggling with, who am I? Like, what do I care about? What are my passions? What are my dreams about? Like what, and this is obviously one of them, but it was clear to me very, very soon thereafter, when I went sober that, I need to start showing up for myself. I need to find some new interests, hobbies and things like that, because I have so much going on in my brain now that I just want to, get it all out and do as many things as I can. But yeah, going back to your point about how you're seeking validation, I was the same way. I did the same exact things that you did. Yeah, I was just, on Facebook, on paper, I looked perfect, right? I did everything right, but I was just slowly killing myself to the liver transplant. It's crazy when I think about that. So when did you notice that your life started to get back on track?
So, I mean, between 29 and 39, it just, the drinking ramped up and up and up.
Right.
So I quit drinking once before this, back when I want to say I was 37, 38. And I quit drinking for about 14 months. So like a good chunk of time. And I didn't.
That's a very good chunk of time. That's more than a year.
Yeah, more than a year. And I knew it was out of control. I remember like I had a box of wine on the counter and I was going back to the box of wine, filling my glass over and over again throughout the day. And it was like noon. I have elementary aged children. It is noon and I am 3 sheets to the wind on red wine, warm out of a box on my counter. And, like I was intended for more than this. My children deserve better, but also I deserve better. And so I quit drinking and I told my husband, I'm like, I'm quitting. I cannot drink anymore. And he's like, okay. I never said another word about it to anybody. So I did not talk to my husband about it. He thought I was mostly doing it for like health reasons, I never found any community. I never found any support. I never talked to anyone about the fact that I was sober and that I was really struggling, because it's hard in those early days to do it, especially alone. So I had zero.
Yeah, I tried to do it alone. Well, not alone. My wife was there for support, but she didn't know like what it felt like to be completely physically, emotionally addicted to alcohol.
Yeah.
So I was trying to find just myself to do a white knuckle it. And so important on that first stint of sobriety to kind of reach out for support, help, anything, because you can't do it by yourself. You just can't. It's too hard. It really is.
Absolutely. The big thing for me was, again, it was the shame. I wasn't going to show my face in a group of people and be like, I have a problem with alcohol, because everything was so perfect. Everything looked so perfect. I could not stand to let down like all of the masks and all of the walls and let people realize I'm not perfect. I could not handle that thought. And I live in a town of 300 people. Alcoholics Anonymous is not anonymous when you live in a town of 300, right? Like everybody knows why your car is parked outside the medical clinic at 7 p.m. on a Friday night if you live in a town of 300. So I knew that wasn't going to be an option. And this was pre-COVID. So all of the Zoom stuff wasn't really available. And mostly it was the shame, though. I just wasn't going to talk to anybody. I wanted to think that I could handle it on my own. I didn't want anybody to know how bad I was struggling. So I did. For 14 months, I stayed sober. And it was really hard and it was really lonely. And I did it anyway. And then, 14 months in, I think I had a bad day. I don't even remember what happened. It was just a bad day. I knew there was beer in the fridge because my husband still drank. And he's very much a normal drinker. He drinks like a 6-pack lasts him a month. I don't understand, but.
I don't understand either.
Right. I knew there was beer in the fridge.
How can people do that?
Oh, yeah, I know. We're not the same. But anyway, I went down, I grabbed a beer, I chugged it, and I was like, all right, I'm good. I don't want any more. I'm fine. And so I was like, I'm fixed. I can moderate. That didn't last a real long time, and it took some time, like 6 months or so, to ramp up to I have a problem again. And then 6 months after that, so a year into my relapse, I totaled my car. I was rage driving around the block. And when I say around the block, like I live in the middle of nowhere. There's no houses. I live like way out rural farmland, right? Dirt roads. And I drove this dirt road, took a turn too fast and totaled my car. And that was kind of my rock bottom. So yeah, I was 39 when that happened. I mean, it's still, even
Wow.
after totaling my car, I wasn't injured, but even after totaling my car, it still took me another 2 months to actually quit.
Yeah. I mean, I was still in denial the second time I went back to the hospital, that I didn't have a drinking problem, even though I was in the hospital, a year prior to that for alcohol. But I was in my head like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
Because I went 125 days sober, and I figured, okay, well, I guess I must be cured, right? Like I must be okay. I must be okay to be able to drink. It just got away from me. But no, it was completely out of control.
Mm-hmm.
You started to like change your ways at 39. Is that when you
At
changed? Is
39,
that when
yeah. So I quit drinking at 39, and the very first thing I did was find community. I found a group of people who get together on Zoom, the one that I mentioned, like where our whole podcast is based off of. And I started talking about my problems for the first time ever in my adult life. I started talking about the fact that I had a problem with alcohol, that I couldn't stop drinking. And that's when things started improving dramatically. I committed to 30 days. I'm like, I know I can do this for 30 days. I'd stayed sober for over a year. I knew I could do 30 days. So I promised myself no matter what happened, I was going to make it through 30 days. And I did. It was hard, but I also had support. I was going to the Zoom meetings. I was talking to people online, which really was just life-changing.
Isn't that so amazing that you were in a town of 300 people and you really couldn't go to AA because there is no anonymous in 300 people town.
Right.
So
Yeah.
with the sober communities the way they are nowadays in 2000 almost 25,
Mm-hmm.
we're so lucky, we're so blessed to have such a tight network of people that you can reach out to in when you're really struggling, because at that time you really couldn't, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, that was in 2019 that I quit drinking the first time. COVID hadn't, like I said, COVID hadn't happened. Zoom wasn't a thing we did. At least it
Right.
wasn't a thing I did.
No, not until the COVID, right?
Right.
It got really huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of changed everything for me, the ability to use Zoom. I mean, if you look at in my town, I was running a youth organization. I was on 3 different committees. I was deeply involved in my town, very respected, very, I worked directly with a lot of kids. There was no way I could let those people find out that I was struggling with alcohol when hiding behind that. So yeah, Zoom was what made it possible for me to actually stay anonymous for a while and start dealing with my stuff. And it was like 3 months into sobriety that I decided to start podcasting and start posting about it on the internet. And I came out as, I hate the word alcoholic, but I came out as having a problem with alcohol. I had a drinking problem, and I started talking about it publicly.
Yeah.
And that was I never in a million years thought that's something I would ever do. But I've come a long way since then. So
yeah. That's so great. That's so great that you found your way after everything you had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we suffer in silence for so long that it's hard to just all of a sudden be who you are and who you were always meant to be. I like that you put it that way. It's who you always meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, alcohol or whatever you're on, seeks its way into the picture and then it just ruins lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you tell me a little bit about when you got sober? What was the thing that you really appreciated the most, or you just didn't realize it at the time, but now you do?
I struggled my whole life with self-loathing, with just not liking myself, not loving myself, feeling like I had to hustle to earn all of that validation and stuff. I had a terrible relationship with myself. The words that went through my head were awful. The self-talk was down. If I said those words to somebody else, it would be considered abuse. That's that was the constant stream of thought in my head for so many years before I started drinking. And even, in that decade that I really drank, I had no idea that quitting drinking and the subsequent emotional work that I did, that I would actually end up really loving who I am. I really enjoy being me. And I never in a million years thought I'd be able to say that.
Yeah, I was the same way. I hated myself. I was so disgusted. Like I said this before on one of an earlier episode, but I didn't walk past the mirror and look at my own reflection for about like 3, 4 years, something crazy.
It too. Yeah, it's wild to think how much I hated myself back then, and just the massive shift that I have gotten to at this point. And I think that that big shift from self-loathing to self-love really happened in like the first year. I'm not going to say there's still days that I struggle. There's still days where I'm like, the self-talk takes over. But it really flipped in that first year to like, I am worthy of love and I do have value.
It's an interesting trend you see with people that abuse substances, right? That is a very common one. Is that we're seeking validation, we don't like who we are inside,
Mhm.
and it's just so hard for us to change it. So Steve is your co-host, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah. How did you two meet?
We met online in Zoom recovery meetings, and then we ended up just connecting and talking kind of outside of the meetings and just really talking about what was going on in life. Like, I think that was the first time I ever experienced having the kind of friend that I could talk to about the really hard stuff, right?
Mhm.
Like, and I can talk about the hard stuff now pretty openly and pretty publicly, but when you're first starting on that journey, there are some words that are really hard to spit out. Even words like talking about self-loathing. I
Mhm.
really struggled to even talk about how much I hated myself, in those early days. And so to have somebody that I could put words to or to that and have them listen and not just the self-loathing, but so many different pieces that I was struggling with. And so we just, we connected over a lot of shared similar feelings and emotions and life experiences. And it turned into, we basically supported each other all the way through early sobriety. So we met when I was 30 days sober. He was 6 months sober. And we don't, we've never done the 12. Well, I've never done the 12-step thing. I've never had a sponsor. But he was kind of my mentor or whatever that is, just safe
Yeah.
place to talk. Everybody in recovery needs that. Like, I'm not big on AA, but they did a couple things really right. The first one is connection is so necessary. I don't care how you find it, you need people to talk to. And the second one is you need like at least one trusted person to talk about everything with.
Mhm.
And I think that it helps to have that be somebody who's experienced it themselves. I had a therapist and she was great, wonderful woman, had never experienced addiction before. So I would say things and she'd be like, yeah, so can you tell me more about that? And I'm like, you have no idea what I'm talking
Yeah,
about,
you
do
don't
you?
know.
Like, she was great. I really did love and respect her, but I wasn't getting what I needed from that conversation because I needed somebody who could be like, I've been there. I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
So that's kind of who Steve ended up being for me. We were really lucky that we just crossed paths at that time and we both kind of needed someone to talk to. So it turned into a really, really special, meaningful friendship.
Yeah. What's an episode in particular that you remember that was a particular favorite for you, or just an interesting topic that maybe came up?
I remember talking about identity and authenticity, which is kind of what you've mentioned is a big part of the journey, right? A big part of recovery. And we did an episode about just discovering who you really are after you quit drinking. And we had a couple of guests on there that were just great and so much fun. And that's authenticity is kind of my passion. That's where, once I quit drinking, I realized I had to start doing the work. And for me, all of that was grounded in authenticity. Who am I? What's important to me? What do I stand for? Letting down all of the perfectionism and stuff and showing up with my flaws and just kind of embracing my whole self, which was terrifying. But
It
that's
is.
what put me on the path to actually being able to recover. That's what put me on that path to loving myself instead of hating myself
Yeah.
was really figuring out who I am.
Yeah, that's so important. That's such a key point, is being authentic with who you are when you get sober. Because it's one thing to just be sober and then you're not growing, you're not evolving at all. You're still you're still that person a little bit, or a lot of it. For me, I was the dry drunk. It's funny, I never heard that term before until like a month ago, and now I can't stop saying it because that's what I was. I
Yeah.
was like a dry drunk instead of being a sober, podcast guy. Or whatever.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was a really hard journey to kind of figure that out, and I do wish I sought support. You mentioned that you didn't, what is it about AA that throws you off?
Never going to bash AA because it has helped so many people. It
Yeah.
just doesn't resonate with me. I don't do well when I feel like I'm being put into a box and told what steps to follow. For me, my recovery has been, I experience life and, hard things happen, cool things happen, whatever it is, life happens. And then I seek to understand what happened, what my response was to that, how I handled it, what I can learn from the situation and go forwards. For me, being put in a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 box just rubs me the wrong way. And it just doesn't fit with how I approach life and approach recovery. And that's okay. For some people, it is exactly what they need. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm also not super religious or spiritual. So I can look past that also. That's not like, there's a lot of people who are so anti-religion. They're like, they hate AA just for that reason.
Yeah, that's always a step that they jump at. They're like, I don't like that one.
Yeah. And, I mean,
get it. I totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the big thing for me is I want people to realize if AA didn't work for you, there's other options.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay that didn't work. You can keep trying other things. For me, talking to somebody one-on-one, and then I had Steve at that point. That was the most important part. For me, was just having a trusted person to talk to. But yeah, AA is great for the right people.
It is. It totally is. And there were times that I got a lot out of AA. That one meeting I would hit that I just needed at that time would kind of save me for another few days or so. But then I would go back to that meeting and it'd be completely different people. I'm not getting anything out of this one, but continuing to go is huge. So that's, if you are enjoying AA, please keep going. That's what their motto, keep going.
Yeah.
You mentioned your children. Have they noticed a big difference in who you are now?
Yeah. So my oldest was, I want to say 19 when I quit drinking this time. Definitely experienced just the really, really rough part of my drinking. Our relationship at this point is basically non-existent. They have pushed me out of their life and there's nothing I can do about that except respect the boundary. And it's the most heartbreaking part of my journey. It is the thing that I struggle with the most. And we talk a lot about acceptance. There's nothing the only thing that I can do in that situation with my oldest is continue to try to be the mother that they need so that if we ever do reunite, I can show up in the way that I'm needed. So that has been really, really hard. My youngest was 14 when I stopped drinking, and our relationship is phenomenal. So younger, I think that because she was younger, I was able to, I hadn't destroyed everything yet, right? 13, 14 is when your kids really need you to show up emotionally and be the person that they can depend on. And I was able to be that for her.
Mm-hmm.
And so our relationship, we speak so openly about alcohol and alcoholism and addiction in our home. It is not a secret. It is a very open part of our conversation. So my youngest daughter actually joined us on the podcast.
Wow, that's cool.
And that was, you asked for podcast episodes that really stand out to me. That one was amazing. She was, 16, 17 when we did that episode. And she was sharing what it was like to have a mom who was addicted to alcohol and also what it's like to have a mom in recovery. We were there. The topic was how to talk to your kids about alcohol and how to talk to your kids about your drinking. And so her perspective was so valuable there. And it was also really healing for us both because she's as much an advocate as I am now with, the importance of talking to your kids about it. If we don't make it this big, scary thing to be ashamed of, and we just talk about alcohol is an addictive substance, people get addicted to it. It doesn't make you a bad person. When we can bring that point of view to more and more people, kids as much as adults, I think we start, getting rid of that stigma a little bit.
That's so true, isn't it? When you just open and talk about how it is an issue and you can, show statistics about it or facts about it, just how terrible it is and how many lives it ruins. I have noticed and I've seen some studies about that the younger generation that are coming up now, they're actually showing signs of alcohol. They're not using alcohol as much and they're more aware of it, almost in the way that cigarettes kind of went away. I'm not away, but much less than it was prior. So I am hopeful that the future can see our mistakes and things and learn from them. And I hope that's my hope and learn from our mistakes because, it is such a destructive drug. I mean, it just ruins everything, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, there's a massive downtrend in drinking, even in like the people who are in their 20s right now, which is fantastic. And it's definitely filtering down into our current teens. I am concerned with things like marijuana and kratom and some other things that are coming in to like take the place of alcohol. And I think those things require or demand as much concern as alcohol. Right now, we kind of blow it off like, weed's fine, it's not addictive, and it's not really causing any harm and whatever. Like, I know so many people who've been addicted to marijuana that are going through the same process that I'm going through with recovery, with learning how to live sober. I know people who have died from kratom. And so
Kratom's that one, I keep seeing it pop up time and time again. It's almost like a hallucinogen / opiate. It's like everything, it seems like. It's really bad.
Yeah, and it's sold over the counter, like in gas stations, which I think is horrifying. But I think that our youth right now are starting to turn to those drugs more than alcohol. I think the reality of it is, as humans, we are trying to avoid and escape pain. That's what we do. It's like in our nature to avoid and escape feeling pain. So what we need to do, instead of just telling kids alcohol is bad and showing them, and I'm so glad that we're at that point, we also, when it comes to our youth, we need to teach them how to be emotionally functional humans. We need to show up and show them what emotional availability looks like. We need to help them with feelings of loneliness and despair and depression, instead of just kind of turning our head and eventually they're going to find something different. That's what they do. I think that, I'm glad that our teenagers are drinking less, but I think we need to start dealing with the emotional piece of it, in order for them to not become the 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds that are trying to escape their own lives.
That's a very, very good point, because that's something we don't really teach. I used to teach at a Montessori school. I was a Montessori middle school teacher, which is really cool. And those were probably the 3 best years of teaching that I've ever had. It doesn't pay very much, unfortunately. I wish it paid like just as much as a public school teacher gets paid. But it doesn't, unfortunately. It's super sad. But the pedagogy and how much they implement, like being your own advocate, being a well-rounded person, like that's introduced at, when you're a toddler in a Montessori school. And I wish that we would adapt that in a public school, because that's going to prevent so many different future mistakes, just how to handle the world and how to have relationships and how to navigate this messy situation that we're all forced into. That's, knowing those things and being able to handle really complex ideas, emotions, feelings, whatever, at a young age is so instrumental to success that you would experience further down the road.
Oh, yeah. Well, and, as a middle school teacher, this, it's that age that kids kind of shift from feeling like the world revolves around them, like they do when they're little, to starting to try to find their place in the world. And middle school is a messy, hard, like emotionally charged time of life. That was like probably some of the worst years of my growing up, was middle school, because I had no idea who I was. I already didn't feel like I was good enough. Kids are freaking mean. And there was so much going on. If we just started a class for every middle schooler in the nation that is like how to be an emotionally healthy human, I think that everything would be changed. That's what our children need. That's what our kids need to not grow up and be addicted to something in their childhood.
Right.
Because if it's not alcohol, it's going to be shopping, or it's going to be, addicted to work or whatever it is. Humans want to escape pain if they don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, that's probably the biggest reason why that drew me into alcohol in the first place, was I just wanted to not have to be me for a little bit, or a long bit in my case, with 10 straight years of alcohol abuse. So it was, it was pretty brutal. And I didn't know how to be me. I was tired of being me. And I was just seeking relief. That's what humans do, right? We just are constantly seeking less amount of suffering. You're trying to figure out who you are. You're trying to find your passions. It's almost like you're always going to be trying to find those passions and things like that, but it's hard. I wonder, what do you recommend to people when they come to you and they just got sober? Like, what's the first thing that you say to them? It's gonna suck. It's gonna suck.
It doesn't have to suck. Like,
You're
really
right. It
doesn't. It's gonna be hard. It doesn't have to be miserable. And I think that's a really important thing for people to understand. Like, you need tools, you need connection. This is a great opportunity to make some friends. This is a great opportunity to start healing and feeling better about yourself. Getting sober is hard. Absolutely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It doesn't have to suck. It doesn't have to be
No, and
miserable.
it doesn't suck. It does not suck.
Yeah,
It's
I mean
awesome. Yeah.
that first month is hard, right? And if you're doing it alone, if you don't have tools, if you don't have support, then it's pretty miserable. If you're lonely and trying to get sober, that's miserable. But we have so many tools and so many mindset tricks and so many different things that we can share with people to make those 30 days a little those I say 30 days because those are usually the hardest. But like make those first 30 to 60 days a little more comfortable, a little easier, make you come out of that feeling like a badass instead of feeling like you just got beat down, right? And I think that heading into then once you get through the mental physical addiction part, then you can dive into real life and start figuring out who you are. And it becomes like this exciting adventure.
Exciting. Yeah, it really is. It's almost like that person that I was for so many years. It's still there and it's still clinging on to me as much as it can. But I'm constantly like, no, like go away. It's frustrating at times. Like I was thinking about when I didn't go by a mirror and see my reflection because I was so ashamed of who I was. I still at times when I'm brushing my teeth at night, I'm like, I have to like force myself to look up sometimes. So I'm so used to that feeling of being less than, nothing, I'm worthless. And that's hard. That's a hard part of the sober journey is finding that self-love. What was that process like for you when you were trying to discover who you were and find that self-love?
Yeah, that was, I don't think that it would take another hour for me to even sort of try to sum up how I got to that point. So I am as much a recovery coach as I am an authenticity coach, helping people find who they are and fall in love with that person, because that to me is what keeps you sober. I can help anybody get sober and quit drinking and leave alcohol behind, but it's the knowing who you are and then falling in love with that is what keeps you sober and makes it amazing. For me, it started out with shedding all of the masks, right? We talk about the emotional masks we wear, whether it's, in my case, a lot of perfectionism, or, there's some people who are just super self-deprecating, and there's some people that are totally stoic and act like nothing's wrong. And we all have a mask that we wear. And to understand that we're doing those things and that we're covering up who we really are, so we can start letting those masks off or taking them off and letting ourselves show up in the world authentically. That's like the first step. And it sounds so easy when I say it. It's so freaking scary to show up in the world authentically when you have presented yourself this way forever, right? Like you were talking about, it looks perfect on Facebook. And then to like take all of that away and be like, okay, here's my real flawed self. This is what it actually looks like under all of that. Is so hard and scary, and is also exactly where the real healing starts.
Yeah. Did you struggle? I struggled with this very much, going out into public or just going into any social gathering setting, whatever, and being you, but sober. Did you struggle with that too?
I did, but the people that I hang out with for the most part aren't really big drinkers anyway. Like I was definitely always drinking way more than anybody else. I mean, it's weird because you don't feel comfortable in your own skin. If you're anything like me, you've talked about the self-loathing, and like if you can't look in the mirror, you and I are on the same page. We understand each other. I would have a couple drinks before I even went to hang out, just so I could hate myself a little bit less and feel a little bit less horrible. And then I would just keep it going all night, right? So to step into a social situation and try to convince yourself like, I'm okay, I'm good enough, it doesn't matter what I say, and it's hard. It's really, and you just have to practice it. You just have to keep doing it.
It is. It's like a skill when you get sober. It's almost practicing, the things that you're uncomfortable with, and you're practicing like, okay, I'm going to be present. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to, like you like give yourself a pep talk as you're talking with people.
How to be human, right?
For real. How to be, not have anything in your system and be genuine, authentic, and just who you are. Let your personality shine.
Yeah, and
if people don't like it, it's okay.
It takes time to get there. The other thing I learned with social stuff is, with this one particular group of friends, I could show up sober and I still had just as much fun sober. I might feel a little more awkward. I might feel a little more uncomfortable, but we were still having great conversations. I still laughed so hard. I still left, girls' night feeling better. Those are real friends. And then there's these people over here that I drank, and when I wasn't drinking, and I was hanging out with them, like I was not enjoying myself. And I realized the only reason that I'm hanging out with those people is because it's an excuse to drink. Like if you only like people if you're also drinking, that's not real friendship. And it's okay to just let those ones go. So I think that's an important part too. With the people that I really have a meaningful connection and meaningful friendship with, I'm a lot more comfortable in my own skin when I'm sober.
Same, me too. Like now that I'm doing everything sober, it's interesting. It's fun to see who I am in these settings that I normally would be pretty bombed at or pretty inebriated, to say the least. It's fun to actually listen to everyone and see their personality. I feel like so much of my life I went through just not even being there. I was there physically, but emotionally I wasn't. I just wasn't conscious of everything going on for so many years that it's been a difficult, very difficult process, but I'm just so glad that we're on the other side of it now and we're helping as many people as we can, sharing our stories and talking about this kind of thing, because that's it. That's everything is just being vulnerable. And I love that on your page, you actually said that vulnerability, that is like is like the essence of sobriety or something like that.
Vulnerability is the antidote to shame.
Antidote. That was the word. Antidote to shame, which is, Can you explain that a little bit in your words?
So I think that shame, and when I talk about shame, people's either their eyes gloss over and they they just go numb, or people cringe because shame isn't fun to talk about. But for most of us, shame is one of the core issues that we were drinking. Like when you talk about not being able to look at yourself or feelings of worthlessness, that's shame, right? That's what's causing that. Shame was massive for me. It was the reason I was drinking, and I was hiding everything. I needed everybody to know I was perfect so that I could hopefully avoid feelings of shame. Turns out that's the wrong way to do it. The way to get over shame is to show up and let people see your faults and let people in and let them be vulnerable. Let them see the things that you're struggling with, share your struggles with them. All of that stuff is really hard. And when you start doing that, the shame starts lifting. And only then can you actually start to fall in love with who you really are, right? We can't love ourselves and be drowning in shame at the same time. So for me, talking openly and vulnerably, whether it's with one person or on the internet, whatever, that's how I overcome shame. That's how anybody overcomes shame, is by talking about it.
That's beautiful. I think that's a great way to close it out. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been great to get to know you.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. I really look forward to getting to know you a little bit better and then jumping on your podcast.
You're going to be on soon too. It'll be great.
Yeah, it'll be really fun. So thank you everybody for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode and keep an eye out for more. Thank you again.